Mike Aresco is kind enough to join us once again, the commissioner of the AAC. Commissioner, thanks so much for your time. Hope you and your family are doing well. How are you?
My pleasure, David. Yeah, doing great. Thank you. Again, as well as can be expected in view of everything that's going on, but we're all healthy, and we hope you and all your listeners and your families are doing well as well. Thank you.
Tuesday night, you were quoted as saying, listen, we've decided it would be premature to make any kind of decision at this point on such an important matter. But what are the people that you're conferring with telling you? All right. Are they optimistic? Are you glass half full or glass half empty right now about your college football season?
David, the glass is half full, and we're cautiously optimistic, and we're moving forward. The idea of a decision at this point is I'm beginning to think it's almost semantics, because there isn't a particular point where you're saying, well, okay, this is written in stone, but we want to move ahead until we can't. And we think that ultimately, unless something happens in the interim, and something could, obviously, I don't want to sound wishy-washy. I just want to say that obviously you don't know. The virus, as Dr. Fauci said, will often determine what's happening. But if trends continue as they are, and that we have very few positives, we have 6 of our 11 schools have no positives, and in their latest round of testing for their student athletes, and it's moving in the right direction there. The counties we're in over the last 2 weeks been a pretty significant percentage drop in cases. No cases, good, obviously, but the point is, it is improving. If that continues, our medical experts, David, have essentially said there is no reason not to play football. There's no medical reason not to play. They've been tracking on the myocarditis issue. They've been tracking on it for some time. It's not new, and they said all the medical groups have been aware of it, and they don't think anything's emerged recently that would change their view. And they're not downplaying it. They're not, acting as though it doesn't matter. But we've done, heart workups across the conference, and after any positive tests, unfortunately, we haven't had that many. Everyone gets, a heart workup, including EKG, echo, blood work monitoring for symptoms. Again, our medical experts advise us regularly. I'm not a doctor, but they talk about all the things they're doing, and they've been talking about it. And this is a condition that fortunately isn't common. And in one of our head doctor has said, in the vast majority of cases, there is recovery. Now, obviously, again, there are some cases where there can be long-term, and even permanent complications, but that's rare. But the point is, their feeling is it's less likely that you're going to, get it during competition. We have, outstanding protocols in place. And the key point, one of the key points I've tried to make for quite some time, and I see Nick Saban made it recently, I know Trevor Lawrence did, I know others have, is that you're safer in our protocols than outside them. And what I mean by that is, I hate to call it, David, and Mark, a bubble. It's not a bubble per se. It's not like the NBA and maybe what MLS was doing, we're doing. But essentially, if you're turned loose and you're no longer playing, you're no longer in that protocol, you're not going to have the regular testing, which could be twice a week. It could, there could be antigen tests as well. We're not certain yet what we're going to do there, but we obviously have the one test a week protocol right now, and we're looking at the other. But we've been testing regularly, and some of our schools have been testing twice a week. The other issue is you're getting health screenings, you're getting all sorts of other things, you're getting sanitary facilities, hospital quality facilities in terms of sanitation, all sorts of other things. In addition, you have an incentive to really, not to do the things that 18 to 22-year-olds typically do, and they're not bad things. They're just things that you can't do during a pandemic if you want to, not obviously contract the disease. And you tend to be more careful because you really want to play. And our student athletes have shown they really want to play. So if you're no longer in those protocols and you contract the disease, you're not going to get tested the same way. You're not going to necessarily know you have it. If you're asymptomatic, the underlying conditions could then appear. You're not going to know. You may have problems that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And so I think in the end, uh, we why do we want to play? Well, we want to play because it means a lot to these student athletes. It's what they live for. It's what they came to college to do. It's important to them. It's important to their families, their communities. If we were hearing from parents that they didn't want to play, we would take that seriously, but that's not what we're hearing. So you have to reduce risk to an acceptable level, to what your board and your medical people think is an acceptable level. You can't eliminate risk. You can't eliminate risk in anything. You walk out on that football field, there's risk. You drive a car, there's risk. You do everything. There could be other kinds of things that you're susceptible to, whether it's diseases or other things, if you do certain activities. But you have to weigh that. And that's what we've tried to do. And our medical people, David, Mark, they would recommend shutting things down if they thought the risk, what was too great. And again, weighing the relative risks of not playing versus playing, their feeling is, and I think Dr. Wolf from Duke, who's been talking, in the media, said the same thing. He's a highly respected, I think, epidemiologist. He said the same thing. Life goes on. We're in a pandemic, yes, but we're going to be in it for a while. We may not have a vaccine, and our feeling is it would be a mistake. When you do something, there's always a reaction. You don't do anything in a vacuum. The easier decision would be not to move forward, to just say, okay, we're washing our hands of it, no problem. We won't have any issues. We won't have liability. We won't have anything. That wouldn't necessarily be the right decision for our student athletes. Now, could things change down the road if we get new information? We're talking to our medical experts. Are talking to the Pac-12 and the Big 12 medical experts to see what prompted their decision, what is emergent, and right now what they've seen doesn't tell them that anything has changed in any significant way, and therefore we feel we have a path to move forward. And obviously with three of the P5 moving forward, it would have been, I've said it publicly a number of times, it would be hard if the A5, the P5, however you want to call them, A5 meaning autonomous five, and obviously, as you know, we want to be in that group. We just haven't really done much with that campaign right now in view of the pandemic. But the point is, if they move ahead, then we see a path to play. If they didn't, if none of them were playing, we would probably see a tough path forward. But that's really, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do right now and how we feel.
Mike, one of the things that we've seen is that we used to do in football and has been taken away because it was deemed unfair was essentially athletic dorms. And you talk about a bubble. Is it? And I thought all along that these need to come back. And if we put all the kids in the same dorm that are playing football and we give them online classes, and if we got to put tutors in there that are in the bubble as well, that there are ways inside the campus to make this easier. Has that been done anywhere? Because you talk about all the things that 18 to 22-year-olds do. If I have them in a dorm, I've got pretty good control. If they're living in apartments, I kind of have to take their word for it. What are the protocols for your conference as far as how the student athletes are going to be housed for football?
Yes, David, the conference doesn't mandate anything, but the schools are definitely looking at that, and they're looking at how they arrange roommates. They're looking at all sorts of things. They're taking social distancing and wearing masks, very seriously. And you're absolutely right. Isn't it ironic that we really tried for years to get rid of the notion of an athletic dorm? We wanted our students, essentially integrated into the college, environment and with other students. And the old days, obviously the bigger football powers did that. But yes, we're looking at that kind of thing, and there's all sorts of plans that schools are looking at. I can't tell you specifically what they're doing. One of the issues obviously is when students come back on campus, what's going to happen. I did hear that one of the SEC schools, I can't name the school, had 10,000 students come back, had a 0.6 percent, 1/6 of 1% of their students tested positive, which is obviously a relatively low number, and it was encouraging to see that. But obviously keeping our student athletes at this point safe means that obviously they've got to do whatever they can to social distance. And that doesn't mean that they can't be students. I mean, that's what they're there for. They are students. And that begs the question, it's a challenge for the chancellors and presidents to bring students back on campus. I don't think, David, that they're going to be bringing as many students back. There will be virtual learning. And even if you're back, there will be, virtual classes. But in terms of the dorm situation, our schools have looked at that, and they've looked at ways to, keep their student athletes, not again, not in a perfect bubble, because again, they are students, and they have to be, part of the campus environment. But again, there's also, they have really gotten, a strict education on, stay away from bars, large gatherings, parties, fraternity parties, that kind of thing, the things that have caused, outbreaks. And that's really important too, because again, they want to play. And if they're not in that environment, and they're not playing, we think that becomes too a mental health issue, in the sense that some of them will get depressed, because again, it is, I'm not suggesting it's certain to happen, but we certainly would have to be prepared, because we know that they really want to play. And then, are they going to be as careful if they're not, if they're not competing? We would hope so, clearly, because we don't want anybody to contract it. But, again, that's what we're dealing with right now. And yes, that's an interesting point too, because again, what you can't do what the NBA and MLS have done, but you can make it safer. And again, you also don't want, there's some complicated issues too, because you don't want special treatment in many respects. The students have to matter too, the regular students. But it is something that has been, talked about, and the kinds of thing. It's funny. I haven't done a survey recently about exactly what the living conditions are, but I'll look into it, because it is something that's been talked about, and there are things they're doing. And just as practices, you'd be amazed at the different protocols for practices that would never have been in place otherwise, relative to social distancing, relative to team meetings, staying apart, staying away. It's something you have to do in this environment.
Talking with Mike Aresco, the commissioner of the AAC, and he joins us here on Miller and Moulton. You haven't, unless I missed it, you haven't made any changes to your schedule, right? You've got your 8 conference games, and then teams in the AAC can still schedule as many as 4 non-conference games, right?
Yes, although there have been some adjustments. We had 2 games, David, on week 0 that we've now moved into the season. One went to September 12th, one went to September 5. We have a few games on September 5 right now. We have some on September 12th, and then we have a couple of conference games on September 19th, and we begin our conference play in earnest September 26th. But we've lost a number of non-conference games. We never expected our teams to be able to play all 12. We gave them the opportunity. Believe it or not, we do have a couple right now who still have 12 games scheduled. We have some with 11. For example, Navy would like to play the Commander-in-Chief games, Air Force and Army, and also play BYU. That's the substitute for Notre Dame. But we don't have, some of our teams are down literally to eight conference games. They've lost all their non-conference games. Some have 9. Some will try to replace them. And we only have a couple of P5 games left. We have UCF. It looks like Georgia Tech, UCF will happen, and also Tulsa, Oklahoma State. We're not sure about any others. There are a couple that are still hanging in the balance, but that's going to determine what we're doing. I was asked recently, do you plan to push back the season? Again, our medical people and our medical group has been meeting for months now regularly, and I talk offline also with the chair, Dr. Craig Stewart of Tulane, who's absolutely outstanding. And they talk to cardiologists, they talk to epidemiologists, they talk to a wide range of people. They don't feel there's any reason why we can't start on time. Now, a lot of people say, well, you've got to see what happens when students come back on campus. Yes, you do. But if we have problems, we'll stop. Games will be moved later. And if in fact you can play earlier, that means you get some games in when the weather's good, when you're playing outside, less chance of the virus spreading. As you get later into the season, we don't know whether we'll get another virus surge. I mean, no one knows. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I think I've heard the virus likes cold, dry conditions. That's why you had outbreaks in meat packing plants and that sort of thing, and that's why they worry about once the fall comes with flu season again. So, if you can get those games in and you don't have problems, then why not try? But you definitely buy time if you move them later. But I'm not sure that even though you're buying time to see what happens, you might have been able to play them. And again, you can pivot. You can make decisions. We had to make decisions on canceling games, David, Mark, on 3-4 days notice with hurricanes and other things. We've had, Florida, of course, we've had hurricane issues. UCF lost games because of hurricanes and floods. And we made those decisions, very close to the game time. So again, if there are issues, and I think we're going to know. A lot of our students are coming back to their campuses now in the middle of August, late and a little bit later in August. We're going to have a pretty good idea. September 5th is still, roughly 3 weeks away.
And my son's a student at one of your schools at East Carolina. I was just looking at stories. Police raiding parties with 400 people at it. I hope he wasn't there, and I hope their football players weren't there. But Mike, there's been a lot of talk on the outside, not from people on the inside of the sport, but boy, it's time for a college football commissioner. Mike, listening to your answer and talking to you, you're talking to your medical people, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12 are talking to their medical people, and they're all on the same page. The Big 10 and Big 12 and Pac 12 are talking to their medical people. They've canceled a season. If there was ever a time for a college football commissioner, sure, this seems like it would be it. But Mike, is that just a pipe dream of sports talk show radio hosts? Because it certainly seems with what's going on, these conferences have not, even though they've communicated, they're very far apart on what they think. Is ultimately that good for the sport?
Well, again, we're dealing with college football, and there's fragmentation. That's a really good, David. That is an outstanding question. It goes to the heart of what's going on now. I don't know that what's happened in recent days is a great look for college football, for college sports. Is it a pipe dream to think that we can have a czar, a commissioner of college football? Probably. And the reason is the conferences seem to really cherish, their autonomy. And I use that term apart from the notion of the autonomy 5, which means that those 5 can create certain kinds of legislation, which we can opt into, and we want to be part of that group because we think we're just like them in most respects. But the point is, they like being able to chart one's own course. But you can see what happens in a situation like this when you're charting your own course. There is no consensus right now on the medical front. Was consensus the goal? I think it would be nice if we had it. But I think the goal has been to make sure everybody has the same information. Our medical people were concerned that they didn't want to have knowledge out there that they weren't aware of, and they didn't want others to have not to have knowledge that we were aware of. So they have been talking. Our medical chair is talking to the Pac-12 and the Big 12 to understand better what they're doing, and there have been conversations before. And there are conversations again with experts all around college football, but there hasn't been, as you said, there hadn't been a unified. We thought originally, okay, you're probably saying, well, where's the NCAA and all this? Well, obviously the NCAA does not, run college football per se, but early on, months ago, I thought we might get some kind of medical guidance, from the NCAA that we would all basically adopt, and it would include guidance from the CDC, the Presidential Task Force, others. And it was clear early on that we weren't going to get it. And that's when I established our medical task force. And that's when other conferences, around the time most conferences were establishing medical task forces. And while there has been some cooperation, there hasn't been enough. And they do differ, in their opinions. They simply do. And you have to, ultimately, we're on our own. And we don't have the kind of overall leadership that obviously you have in pro sports, where you have a commissioner and you have a league. We just don't have that. And part of it is because college football a while ago, as you know, the history of it broke away, and we have a CFP, but we don't, again, there's no czar, there's no commissioner who is part of the college football playoff who runs FBS football. Somebody said, well, it's about time, we had that. I just don't think you're going to get it. I just think the reality of it is that the conference aren't going to give up, their autonomy. But in this particular case, we're on our own, and we have to show leadership ourselves. We have to do what we think is right. We take the best medical evidence, and we have to use our own judgment. The Big Ten, Pac-12 made a decision. We respect that, but we don't agree with those decisions. Now, again, they have unique circumstances. They've cited, medical concerns. Obviously the Pac-12 has, other issues, and they've talked about those out in California and some of their states. The Big Ten has cited some things that have happened there that cause them concern. But our medical people have looked at this very closely, and we trust them. And they're talking again to outside experts. They're not just relying on their internal people, but and they're also they're talking to different kinds of doctors, epidemiologists, cardiologists, and they feel they're making the best judgments they possibly can. But yeah, there's a fragmentation that hasn't created a really good look for college sports right now. But I don't think that's going to change. The P5, and we wanted to be in that room, and I've talked about being in that room. And by the way, we've had a number of P5, G5. I hate that we're in the G5, but we've had those meetings pretty regularly recently, and we share information and we talk about what we're doing. The P5 we're meeting, I think, daily at one point, and everybody thought, well, they'll definitely arrive at a consensus. But, college football was once a very regional sport. It's become national because of the BCS and now the CFP, but it still has regional roots, and everybody has a different view of what they're doing and how they're going to do it. And everybody, puts together, nobody, I guess, ultimately decided to put together, at least among the P5, to put together a national medical panel that would advise everybody. Everybody wanted to go their own way. And I just suspect that that's going to continue. And I know it causes problems, and it can create what looks like a dysfunctional situation where you have two conferences not playing and three right now, and us and a few G5 conferences deciding to play. I get that. But I don't honestly think it's going to change, at least in the short term.
Mike, thanks for your time. All the best to you, your family, and your staff within the AAC. That everybody stay safe and healthy, and hopefully that you can pull this off. And if so, we'll talk down the road.
These were really good questions. David, Mark, always great to talk to you. Please say hi to Gary Danielson for me, David. And again, thanks for having me. Again, we have a tough path ahead. We're trying to make the right decisions. This is a tough time for everyone. But I think Condoleezza Rice talked to the conference commissioners at one point a while back and said, if you're doing things for the right reasons, and we think we are, because health and safety have been our primary focus from the beginning. If you do things for the right reasons, you have a much better chance to arrive at good policy decisions. And that's obviously what we're trying to do. And we can't forget the student athletes. Really, their health and well-being is the entire focus here. And I appreciate, again, having a chance to talk to you. I hope you and your families and everybody in the community, stay safe and healthy and stay well. Thanks again.
Mike Aresco, the commissioner of the AAC, joining us here on Miller and Moulton. The